my name is Adeo Resi. I'm just going to briefly introduce myself. We're talking about a pretty important topic today, how to fast track Fund One. And so let me introduce myself, talk about the topic, and then we're going to have time at the end for you to ask questions. You're going to notice at the bottom of the screen, there's an emoji. So if you like something, you can like put hearts. I just put a heart up there. But there'll also be the opportunity on the right side of your screen. There's a Q&A button. It has two circles up. Thank you for the emojis. So if you have a question, you can go to the Q&A, ask the question, and towards the end of the presentation, we'll go through that. So that's sort of Robert Rules of Order. There's also a chat area where you noted I was muted earlier. That's a great place to introduce yourself so you can talk a little bit about your interest. You can post your LinkedIn. And what I don't do, though, is if you have a fund that you're working on, and hopefully everyone here is working on a fund, don't put your fund thesis in there because that could be construed as general solicitation. So in terms of me, I'm CEO of the Dessel Group, which is parent company of VC Lab. Our vision is really to transform venture capital into a force for good in the world. Every firm that we work with, we ask to agree to the Mensarius Oath publicly, which is an ethical oath of investing. It talks about things like fairness and treating people with respect and making sure that they're good outcomes for everyone. And we believe that venture capital is a force for good in the world because you can take money from wealthy limited partners and give it to entrepreneurs who are going to shape the future of humanity. So if you give it to entrepreneurs that are building weapons and weapon related technology, that may not be a great outcome for humanity. If you give it to entrepreneurs that are fixing things like the climate crisis and working to reduce the amount of plastic that we use, and looking at things like energy security and advances in many industries that need disruption, like insurance and telephony, and many industries need disruption. You can actually use venture capital to improve the plight of humanity on the planet. So that's what I'm working on. That's what Dessel Group is working on. That's what VC Lab is working on. And what we're going to do today is talk with you a little bit about how you can fast track launching a venture capital firm and fund. And so this is what we do every single day. And I was looking for a presentation to share. I find presentations kind of boring. What I'll do is I'll just walk you through it. I'll answer questions that you have as they come along. So if you have a uh, question, pop it in the Q&A and I'll do real-time Q&A with you. All right. So when you launch a venture capital fund, there's essentially two things that you need. I'm going to tell you how to do them and get them, and then and I'll give you some tips on tools, etc., and of course go into your questions. So the first thing that you need, and is very critical, is a thesis, and the second thing that you need are limited partners. That's it. Okay? If you have a thesis and you have limited partners, you have everything you need to create a venture capital firm and fund. All right. And so I'll dive into specifics on both, but it's really that simple. Now, of course, like chess and many other things, games and things that seem really simple can have endless amounts of complexity. And so I'm going to kind of boil it down to the simplest things and tell you about ways to get it done as fast as possible. But of course, they are much more complicated than they sound. So a thesis is essentially saying, hey, I am going to start this venture capital firm and fund to invest in certain things that look like this. Because venture capital funds are called blind pools. And what a blind pool versus a non-blind pool A blind pool means that the manager is saying, I'm going to invest in these things, but I don't know exactly what they are right now. So you're going to give me money blind, and I'm going to make these investments. A non blind pool is like a classic special purpose vehicle or SPV, where it's like, hey, I've got this hot company. It's this specific company. And if you invest in this SPV, you're essentially investing in this company. So it's non blind. You know exactly what you're going to get. Now, as you can imagine, non-blind pools are very easy to get investors for, because it's like, hey, I've got SpaceX shares in an SPV. Would you like SpaceX shares? Like, I would like SpaceX shares. So very easy. Invest in this. Non-blind pools are or blind pools are very hard. It's like, I'm a manager. I'm going to invest in stuff. If you invest in me, you get to invest in the stuff that I decide to invest in. So, how do you sell a blind pool? You need a thesis. And the thesis basically says, uh, I'm raising this much money to invest in a certain stage, in a certain geography, and a certain type of company. Okay. So those are very important things: stage, geography, and type of company. Obviously, the amount of the fund is also very important, but the three critical things are stage, geography, type of company. All right. Now, a lot of people are like, well, early stage is not a stage. Okay, you want to invest in either, it could be pre-seed, seed, series A, series B. You want to be very specific on the type of stage, because remember, you're going into this blind pool, and the way that you de-risk a blind pool is you try to be as specific as possible in your thesis, and then it feels more real. So if you make any element of your thesis vague, you're going back to the blind pool area, and then the LPs are just betting blindly on you, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. But basically, you want to make it less blind for them by, again, stage, geography, and industry. So you want to be as specific as possible on stage. It could be venture studio, angel, pre-seed, seed, series A, series B, etc. So you want to pick one stage. Now, a lot of you are going to be like, but I might want to do seed and I might want to do some pre-seed deals. So a thesis in a blind pool, it means that 80 to 90% of your deals will match the thesis, but not 100%. So if you say you're going to do a seed stage fund, and it's expected that you might do a couple pre-seed investments or a series A investment, right? So it's 80 to 90% of every deal should match the thesis, but not 100%. So it's not I like to say, it's not like a law, it's more like guidelines, right? So your stage needs to be very specific. And of course, if you say seed stage and you do 2 or 3 pre-seed deals, that's fine. Okay. Now let's move on to geography, because this is another giant area where people mess up. So you'll say, hey, I'm going to invest in the world, or India, China, US, and Latin America. And it's like, again, you want to be as specific as possible. And there's even more reasons than the blind pool for this one. Every place that you invest, your LPs will invest. So every place that you invest, you and your LPs will have to manage regulatory issues, tax issues, etc. And there's a lot of people, let's say in Europe, that don't want to invest in the US. A lot of people in the US that don't want to invest in Europe because they don't want to deal with European taxes or US taxes or whatever. So LPs really don't want to invest in the world. They don't want to invest uh, in India and America because they don't want to deal with Indian and American regulations. So I see a lot of people say like, I'm doing a fund that's going to invest in these places, and it may even be a great idea. It may even be a great thing that you're investing in India and the US, right? That could be a perfectly amazing idea. However, the LPs don't want to pay taxes and don't want to deal with the regulatory hurdles of having investments in India and the US. So really, you know, you must pick a geography. It will help you with LPs, right? And so when I see people saying multiple geographies or multiple regions, you're scaring away limited partners that just don't want to have to pay taxes in various countries in Africa and various countries in Europe and the US and blah, 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 deal with regulatory issues in all those places. And the reason this happens is the fund itself is what's called a pass through vehicle. So when you take an LP's money and you invest it in a place, it's like the LP has taken their money and invested it in that place. So they have to deal with the taxes, they have to deal with the regulatory stuff. You have to deal with the taxes, you have to deal with the regulatory stuff. And a lot of LPs just don't want to do that. So you really need to pick a geography where you're going to invest. Now, let's talk next about industry. This is another area where lots of managers make mistakes. Um, Most LPs, right? They are interested in investing in things, right? Things like space or things like AI or things like clean tech or things like, the list goes on, biotech, healthcare, da 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 da, right? They only 17% of LPs want to invest in generalist funds. Okay. So just that's an important stat that I want burned in your head. So if you're going out and you're saying, I'm going to start a firm and fund and I want to get the maximum number of LPs, and you say, I'm going to invest in anything industry wise, right? You've immediately taken, there's 100% of LPs in the world today. Now you're down to only 17% of LPs are interested in generalist firms and funds. Okay. So you've cut out 83% of all LPs from your fundraising. So if you know 100 LPs, 17 will want to invest in a generalist fund. So you're basically like cutting yourself off at the knees by having a generalist fund. And someone was like, well, I'm investing in AI, deep tech, healthcare, and da 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 da. At some point, if you have too many industries, you're basically a generalist fund, right? So I'm going to tell you how to pick the industries in a moment, but the general point is pick one, maybe two industries at most. You can merge industries in such a way, saying like, hey, I'm doing AI powered healthcare. So it's like AI and healthcare merged, right? So you can merge industries. But generally speaking, if you want to get the maximum number of LPs interested in what you're doing, you've got to have a specialized industry. So again, specific stage like seed, a specific geography like the US or Europe or a part of Africa, etc. And last but not least, a specific industry or two. These are very critical decisions that you need to make when you're building a blind pool to get the maximum number of LPs to invest in what you're doing and fast track your fund. All right. So let's talk about another major component, which is you. So when an LP is investing in your firm and fund, they're actually investing in you. Okay. So you need this thesis because it's a blind pool, but then you need to tell the LPs why you are uniquely qualified to run this firm and fund because they're going to back you. And if you don't really have something that makes a lot of sense, they're not going to invest. So it's got to be like, hey, you want to invest in me doing these seed stage US AI companies because I have invested in, 30 of these companies and have a very good track record, let's say 5x TVPI and 2 DPI, right? So investing track record, if you have an investing track record, that's the absolute best reason to trust you as an investor. But there's lots of other reasons. And we have a whole article on this. And maybe if you could, Domenica, put the article on like what some of the we call this your secret sauce. So if you could put the article on secret sauce in the chat so people could read about the different secret sauce items. So I'll sort of your investing track record is your best why you secret sauce. But not everyone has an investing track record. The worst um, thing that you can say for the YU secret sauce is years of experience. So if I have like 25 years of experience, like there are lots of people that have 25 years of experience. So between that and investing, there's a number of different things you can say. So for example, if you have a help raise a lot of money, that's very good. So if you've helped AI, let's go back to the seed stage US AI companies. I'm going to use that as an example. And I'll give some examples of secret sauce. So if I've helped a lot of AI companies raise money, so I've helped 20 AI companies raise $1 billion in capital. Well, that's pretty impressive, right? That's a good reason why I should be an investor because I know how to raise money. I can help my portfolio companies raise money. If my portfolio companies raise more money, I'll get markups. That will be very good. You could say, oh, I've helped 10 AI companies do M&A for this much for $1 billion. Well, that's also very good. So again, I've taken AI companies, I've helped them sell, they've made a lot of money for investors. That sounds great. That's a great reason why you should be launching a fund. There are a lot of other reasons, so I'll go through a few more. Another great YU is I have a big network. So I have a network with 1,000 AI engineers, 10 of which have built unicorns. Well, that's fantastic. Wow, you have, so many AI engineers and they've created unicorns. I want to help you. That's great deal flow, right? So you want to try and you want to try and identify the thesis, and then you want to find on the other side why you. And it's a little bit of the best way I can describe this is sort of like a chicken and egg game, right? Because you say, okay, I like this thesis and I have a great background to do it, but maybe there's 10 or 15 things that make me very unique. Here's the thing, you have to find the one or two things of the 10 or 15 that really, really stand out. And the thing that is important, if you have a great track record in biotech and you want to go into AI, unfortunately, you can't use your biotech track record with an AI thesis. So you have to look through all your biotech companies, find the ones that are related to AI, and then talk about them. So let's say I did 30 biotech investments, but now I want to do an AI thesis. I'm going to have to find the 5 biotech investments that have an AI component and then use those 5 in the why me justification for doing AI. So, I've done 5 AI related investments with this type of TVPI, for example, right? So it's very important that the YU, the secret sauce, is related to the thesis. And the chicken and egg component is you may have multiple things and you may need to tweak your thesis a little bit to match the YU that is the best that you have. So, for example, going back to this healthcare AI thing, if you really want to do AI and the 5 AI companies in your healthcare portfolio aren't performing very well, you might need to tweak the thesis, right? To get the best performing companies of your investment track record. So there's that back and forth between the two sides and say, well, my AI companies aren't performing that well. So maybe I have to tweak the area that I'm focusing on to get the best possible companies from my track record. And so let's talk about fast tracking here. If you really want to launch a fund, that process of refining your thesis to the point where LPs will be impressed by it takes months. Okay. And I wish it sounds easy, right? We have a whole, and maybe you could put a link to our whole thesis process for you. We have a whole thing you can walk through to do it. And like all things that sound easy, they sound easy and but they're actually much harder than they seem. So it literally will take you, if you move very fast and work on it religiously every week, it can take you a month. If you move on a more normal pace, it could take you 2 or 3 months and even 6 months to get the thesis right. And I'm going to tell you a process of how to do this and how this will fast track it, right? So remember, the 2 things you need to get a fund off the ground are a thesis and LPs. Now, how do you know if your thesis is any good? Anyone want to take a guess in the chat? How do you know if your thesis is any good? This isn't, you can type your answer. I'm reading the chat. All right. No one, are you unable to type or, LPs will express interest. A lot of people. Excellent. Yes, correct. Now, so that's the only way you'll know if your thesis is any good, unfortunately, is if LPs are like, oh, this is very good. So I'll give you ratios so that you know. And I'll even tell you how to test it. Now, if 1 in 5 people that you tell your thesis to, you actually don't need, and we have a whole 1 sentence thesis thing. So you can literally say, hey, I'm working on a fund. I've been developing this thesis. I'd love to share it with you quickly and get your opinion. And you share your 1 sentence thesis. And they're like, wow, that's really great. I'm excited for you. I think you'd be great for it. Love to learn more. If you get that kind of response 1 in 5 times, that means that your thesis is good. If it's, you can get as high as 2 or 3 in 5 times, then you're fantastic at pitching and you have a great thesis. But generally speaking, it's about 1 in 5. If you're at the 1 in 10 ratio, you have work to do, but you're directionally correct. And then it's usually 1 in 15 or 1 in 20, and you don't really have anything yet. It's still very weak. So again, 1 in 15, 1 in 20, not very good. 1 in 10, you're getting close. 1 in 5, you have it good. And the way you present it is you find, so this is how you test it. Okay, this is very important. You find people you know that have money. So they're not, maybe they're angel investors, maybe they're just high net worth individuals. So you have to find people you know that you have money, and you have to know them, and you have to know that they have money. Because if you ask a friend that doesn't have any money, they may say, oh, that's very interesting, but they're not really a LP, so they can't potentially be an LP. So it doesn't really count. It might be good for early testing, but you need to find people you know that have money, and you need to do what I just did, and I'll recreate it for you again. Hey, I'm working on this new thing. It's a fund. I'd love to get your feedback. Here's the thesis. Say what your thesis is. What do you think? And if they're like, wow, that's really interesting. I think that's great. I'd love to learn more. Check. If they're like, I don't know, man, that doesn't, will that really work? Are you sure? La la, I'm not really sure that makes sense, or I'm not really interested in that at all, or I don't understand anything about this. That's fail, right? So even if you have a good thesis, 4 out of 5 times people are going to be like, I don't get it. No. But 1 out of 5 times they'll be like, Dad, this is really interested. I want to move forward. So that's how you know if you have a good thesis. Okay. So I can tell you that the process of getting the ideas together, putting it into a very concise format, testing it with your friends who are wealthy, that can take months. Okay. So if you want to fast track your fund, you want to start that right now, right? Because if you're not working on it full time, it's definitely going to take months. If you're working on it full time, you can get it done in a month or two. But that is the single longest gating item because it really is not as easy as it sounds. And we'll give you resources in the chat. I've just walked you through the main components of it. I'll talk about another big mistake that people make, and this is very important. Okay. And then I want to talk about the LP because the two things you need are a thesis and LPs. So I'll wrap up the thesis with this point and then go on to LPs. So the biggest mistake that people make is they make their fund size for fund one too large. Okay. Fund one is an MVP, right? It would be like you spending 3 years to make something, and then like a Flappy Bird. It took you 3 years to make Flappy Bird. I made Flappy Bird 3 years, and like no one uses it. It's like what? You spent 3 years on that turd? Like, so fun one is an MVP. You got to treat it like an MVP. You've got to get it out the door super fast. You got to get it in front of LPs super fast. You got to see if they like it. If they don't like it, you got to keep working on the thesis. And you want to keep your fund size really, really small, right? Because the goal of fund one is to get to fund two. The goal of fund two is to get to fund three. And there's a lot of reasons for this. When you are in fund one, fund two, and fund three, you are referred to as an emerging manager. Emerging managers make lots of returns, but they're considered a pariah among LPs. Big limited partners like endowments, sovereign wealth funds, insurance companies, blah, 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 they do not invest in emerging managers. Okay. They say they do, and they may do one a year or two a year, right? And like and they put those poor souls through like, like crawl over bones on the way to hell, right, to get their money. So it's really a cruel and unusual process to win these big LPs. And they only let one of the 1,000 or so, emerging managers that apply get the money. So they really just don't invest in emerging managers. So what you want to do is get through fund one, get through fund two, and get through fund three very quickly to get to fund four when you can go after the bigger pools of capital. And now emerging managers are a pariah, and what's called new managers, which are people who are in fund one, are like completely taboo. So no big investors really do new managers at all. And again, they'll say they do new managers, and they do even less new managers than emerging managers. Okay, so they're gonna lie straight to your face and be like, "Sure, we doing new managers." It's like, when was the last time you invested in a new manager? Like 3 years ago. Like, okay, like, so I have to wait 3 years. Yeah, you don't want to. So you want to have a very small fund one that you can raise from people that you know, some people, second degree connections, etc. And that allows you to build some track record in the industry. Then you can go to fund two. Now, generally speaking, from fund one to fund two, and from fund two to fund three, you can increase the fund size between 2 and 5 times. So if you do very good job on, so let's do some basic math. Let's say you say, I want to get started, I want to close this, I want to build track record. So I'm going to do a fund one at $5 million. Okay. So $5 million fund one. You can close it very quickly within 18 months, the total amount raised. You can deploy it very quickly and very quickly on to fund two, sometimes within 2 years. Okay. Now, fund two can be 2 to 5 times bigger. Fund one has some success in it. You can easily do 5 times. So now your fund two is 25 million, right? And that's raised sometimes within 2 years. Okay. So now you have fund one and fund two, and now you have $30 million under management within 2 or 3 years. Okay. That's pretty good. If you conversely were to go out and say, hey, I'm doing a $30 million fund one, which a lot of people say they're going to do, in my experience, just raising that $30 million fund one will take 3 to 5 years. Okay. I've seen this happen. They're all over the world. People are like, I'm going to go for 30 million fund one. It takes them 3 to 5 years to raise it. Conversely, if you start with a $5 million fund one, you can have it done within 18 months, start your fund two for $25 million, and probably close that in less time than it would take you to do a $30 million fund one. And by the way, when you go to fund three, now you have a $25 million fund two. If you did really well, you could do $125 million fund three. So actually doing a smaller fund one gets you to more AUM faster than doing a larger fund one. And this is like, I can't stress, I want you to hear me. This is super important. So if you hear me, give me a thumbs up. Okay. If you do a smaller fund one, you will get to a larger AUM faster than if you did a larger fund one. All right. Because the fund one is an MVP. You're in a penalty box with limited partners in fund one. So you want to get out of fund one as quickly as possible into fund two, out of fund two as quickly as possible into fund three. So this is why you don't want them to be very big, because the other problem with having a big fund one and a big fund two is, type in the chat, what happens when you have a bigger fund? What there's something that definitively always happens with a bigger fund. Anyone have an idea what that is? Yes, you have more money, as people were giving the emojis, but type in the chat. It takes longer not to exit, but it takes longer to deploy because you have more money, right? So yeah, if I'm deploying $5 million, I can do that very quickly. If I have $30 million, it takes me a long time. So you're like, hey, I like the penalty box, right? So I'm going to stay in the penalty box for a long time by having a larger fund run. Why would you ever do that? Right? You should never do that. You want to get out of the penalty box very quickly onto fund two, out of the penalty box even further in fund three, and eventually to fund four. So the smaller funds you have in fund one, two, three, the faster you raise them, the faster you deploy them, the faster you can get it out of the penalty box and start talking with the biggest LPs in the world, who will make your life in some ways harder, but in some ways easier as well. All right, so I've talked a little bit about fund size, I've talked about your thesis, and now I want to talk about LPs. I see there's some questions in the Q&A. So let me address some of those in real time. Narayan's asking, if LP doesn't think your thesis is great yet, what's the best way to keep them in the loop? Great question there. Let me see if I can mark it as answered. Maybe if you can mark it as answered for me, Domenica, that would be great. So look, if the great news about pitching people you know and say, hey, I'm working on this idea, it's a fund, here's my thesis, tell me what you think, is you can go back to them when you fix the thesis. So if they're like, I'm not so sure, I don't really like it that much, doesn't really work for me, and then you go talk to some other people and you fix your thesis, you can go back to that person and say, hey buddy, I've been got a lot of feedback, I made some changes, I'd love to run the new version by you and see what you think. And you can do that 2, 3, up to 5 times depending on how good a friend it is. And so many, many times I myself have had a thesis, they've been like, no, I've been like worked on it, got it better, brought it back to them and got a yes. So you want to not say, I'm working on a fund, this is it, it's 100% done, what do you think? You want to say, hey, I'm working on a fund, I have this thesis, I'd love your feedback, and tell me how I could make it better. You want to ask them for feedback, not for money. And this is the oldest advice in fundraising 101. If you want money, ask for advice. If you want advice, ask for money. Right? So you ask for advice, they give you their feedback, you collect feedback, you fix it, and you go back and you can get a yes. The second thing you do is you put them on your newsletter. So if you've gone back 2 or 3 times and they just say, "Look, I'm love where you're going. I think it's working great, but I'm just not going to invest in any venture right now." You could say, "Hey, look, thank you. Do you mind if I put you on my newsletter to keep you update with the things that we're doing?" Yeah, that would be great. Put them on your newsletter. So you can go back to people. That would be my recommendation number 1. Narayan. And number 2 is you can put them on the newsletter, and that also works very well. Yasmin is asking, when sharing the thesis with potential LPs, I know, should I be just like an elevator pitch or presenting a deck? Yeah, do not use a deck. Okay, this is a great question. All right, this is super important. A lot of so many people are like, but I need a deck. I need a deck. Every single great fundraiser that I have ever met for a venture capital firm does not use a deck. Okay. You do not need a deck. You don't even want a deck. If you're using a deck, you have failed. Now, there'll be some people who are like, send me a deck. And when you're working on your thesis, you don't want to have a deck because you're kind of like making tectonic shifts in the thesis, right? So you don't want to be like, oh God, I was doing AI healthcare and now I'm doing AI, whatever in space. Oh, how do I change this deck? You want to be very nimble in your ability to change the thesis based on feedback until you're getting 1 in 5 people saying yes. And so, number 1, most people don't use decks that are good fundraising with LPs. And number 2, since you're in thesis refinement mode, you want to get that thesis to the point where it really resonates with the limited partners, and then do the deck, right? Because the deck basically takes your thesis and expands it, right? So if you're not sure what your thesis is yet, you definitely don't want to do a deck. And you don't even need a deck. Now, Okay, someone, Matthias has a question as well. I'm working on a fund, have a thesis, and got soft commitments of people that want to invest. What's next? Yeah, so I'll talk about that. I'm going to go into limited partners in a moment. So let me answer that question. Keep your questions coming in, guys, and that would be super helpful. I'll talk about LPs and I'll do more questions. So generally speaking, Matthias, you okay. There's a difference between soft and hard commitments. So let me just walk you through some parameters here. And this is actually a good segue question into LPs. Okay. So when someone express interest in your fund, oh wow, that's a great thesis. I'm really interested, love to learn more. Um, that's what I would call a soft commitment. Generally speaking, I consider a soft commitment if they mention a dollar amount, and it could come in a range. So they say, I'm really interested, I'd love to learn more. I'm interested in about 100 to 250,000 position. At that point, that limited partner has made what could be called soft circled or a soft commitment to the fund. They've expressed interest and they've given a number, usually verbally. I start to consider commitments hard when they write it in an email or some other form, text message. So when it's written and it's no longer a range, but it's a specific number. So it's like, yeah, put me down for 250,000. Then it's a hard commitment. Now we have a document, and maybe Domenica, you could put a link to the document in here called the pact. Um, and the pact is a non-binding letter of intent by a limited partner to invest in a fund. And so if what we I like to say is soft circled is everything until a pact, and I prefer to call something hard circled when someone signs a pact, which is a non-binding letter of intent to invest. So it doesn't really mean much, but it means they're hard circled. Now, why do you soft and hard circle limited partners at all? Let's talk a little bit about that. So you need to get a critical mass of limited partners interested in your thesis before you start any process forming a fund. And a huge mistake that people make is they start working with lawyers and back office providers and all this stuff long before they're ready. These lawyers charge you and these vendors charge you and they make you sign cumbersome agreements with long lock-in periods because they're predatory. And the industry is filled with really unethical vendors. I mean, I can go on a huge tangent here. Um, the vendors in venture capital are unethical, full stop. I was talking with a manager yesterday. It broke my heart. They have a top law firm sent them agreements that are illegal. Okay. The laws were changed by the SEC that make things in the agreements that they signed a few months ago illegal. And I'm like, how does this even happen? Like, how did that happen? This is illegal. You can't offer this. And they built a deck around it because it's in their agreements, and they're like, we're going to give you this and we're going to give you that, and the stuff they're offering LPs, which is in their agreements, is illegal. And it was done by a law firm, a big law firm. I'm like, how does this happen? So don't go to vendors until you have hard circled commitments from your limited partners for at least 10% of your fund size, and or $1 million, whichever is bigger. So if you're doing a small, let's say a $5 million fund, 10% of your fund size would be 500,000. But really, the minimum you need in hard circled commitments from LPs before you even think of talking to vendors is either $1 million or 10% of the fund size, whichever is greater. So back to the question from Matthias on the LP side. So you need to wait until you have a critical mass of limited partner interest, and then you need to go find vendors and start a formation process. And this normally takes a few months, right? So you're going to have LPs that have said, I'm ready to invest in your firm and fund. I love what you're doing. And you're going to have to be like, okay, I'm going to now go out and get more LPs. And as soon as I have critical mass, we're going to start a formation process. And that formation process can also take months. The average time today is 3 months. So if you have someone that's really interested in your fund right now, it might take you a few months to get the critical mass, and it's going to take you another roughly 3 months to close. So you could be 6 months, 9 months, or worst case, 12 months away from actually getting money from someone who said they're going to give you money. So how do you fast track that? Okay, that's what we're talking about today. And by the way, if anyone else has questions, don't write it into the chat. There's one here. What if we want to do a government link VC instead? Put that in the Q&A if you don't mind, because it's a little, what are key elements? So please, I'm not monitoring the chat for questions. So if you take your questions and put it in the Q&A, chat's a little hard for me to read. The Q&A is better. I would appreciate it. But so I'll answer those questions in the chat as best I can, but it would be easier in the Q&A. All right, so back to this. So how do you fast track that? Fundraising is a momentum game, okay? So you've got to create momentum in order to get closings and commitments, etc. And so you can't really do it part-time. You can't build momentum part-time. So if you're doing 10 hours a week on fundraising, you're never going to get the momentum. And that's why a lot of people, it can take years to close even a small fund, right? So the single best thing you can do is, number one, keep your fund size smaller. And then number two, you have to work on it full time. And you have to focus all of your time, attention, and energy on fundraising. Because what happens with the momentum thing is you start building. So you get a commitment here. Let's say it's 100,000. Then you get another commitment for 250,000. You get another couple 100,000. Then you get a 500,000. You're like, whoa. And you're sending newsletters out. You're following up with the investors that committed. Say, oh, we just crossed $1 million in commitments. Do you know anyone that would be interested in investing? They refer someone. Then you cross 1.5 million. Then you're like, hey, this is great. We crossed 1.5. We want to get to 2 in the next couple of weeks. So by you focusing full time, you maintaining regular communications with the LPs that you have committed to you, you can build that momentum. Now, there's something about LP fundraising that's very important, okay? You cannot do what's called general solicitation. So you cannot put your thesis out. You cannot tell people that you are raising a fund. You cannot not even tell your thesis to people you do not know. You must know the person first and then pitch them second. So how do you get around general solicitation? How do you build momentum within these rules and regulations? It's very easy. Everybody does it. So of course, let's say I'm investing in AI. I can publish stories on AI. I can publish stories about people investing in AI. I can publish my thoughts about investing in AI. I just can't tell people that I'm launching a fund to invest in AI. But everything else I can do, I can talk about AI all day long, talk about investing in AI, talk about trends in AI, all this stuff. The more you talk about those areas that you're investing in, you'll start building up a brand. Okay. As you build up a brand, you're going to start having LPs in your network, right? That are like, oh, this person's talking about AI all the time. I'm an LP interested in investing in AI. I'm going to follow this person on LinkedIn or on X or whatever, right? Then you can do events, right? So you can do virtual events, you can do real world events, and you can invite your social network to the events. And in the event systems, you can ask, are you a limited partner? Are you a angel investor? Are you an entrepreneur? And so then you segment your event audience. And because someone attended an event that you throw, you can at that point justify that you know them because they've been to one of your events. Of course, I know them. They came to my event, right? At which point you're at liberty under the law to pitch them. It's that simple. So if you have a good thesis, you know the sectors you're investing in, the stage you're investing in, you start talking about the sector and the stage on social media and other platforms without telling your thesis, without saying you're raising a fund. That builds your network. Step 2, you start doing events for your network. When the people come in for the events, you figure out who are investors and who are not investors, and then you can reach out to those investors and present to them your idea. And I would even go back and say the same thing I said earlier, which is like, hey, you came to my event, thank you very much, great, I hope you enjoyed it. I've been really thinking about launching a fund in the space here. I'd love to run my thesis by you for any feedback or ideas that you have. Would you be open to hearing it? Sure. Tell me what you're thinking. Here's my thesis. What do you think? Oh, that's really interesting. I'd love to participate. Great. Sign a pact. Right. So that's it, guys. That's how you do it. Okay. And if you can do it in such a way where you're dedicating the time and attention so that you can create that critical mass. Let's go back to the thesis and back to the fundraising. If you really put your time and attention into the thesis, you can get it done in a month. Okay. If you really put your time and attention in to the fundraising, you can get that done in about 3 months, and then you can close in another month or two, right? Because a fast close could be done in a month. So you can have the whole thing done in 4, 5, or 6 months from idea to first close where you're actually deploying money into startups. Okay. That's how you fast track it. All right. So I've covered pretty much everything you need to know. There's a couple questions here I'll go through quickly. Let's go to the Q&A first. I recall some people are promoting Max Pogs. Would they be considered general solicitation? Yeah, Max Pog, we don't support Max Pog. And yes, he's doing general solicitation, and he does all these kind of cheesy growth hacks to get people to attend his events. I don't. No, it's not. We don't support Max Pog. I had an pitch dinner with 10 potential LPs and startups. A few LPs already asked for PPM, LP, and subscription agreement. Should I strike while hot? No, guys. So look, make them sign. If you're in fundraising mode, you need to get a certain amount of commitments. Make them sign a pact first, right? And say, hey, if you want more materials, sign this document, show me that you're interested, and then we'll collect. When we're ready to close, I'll send you the final materials. There's no striking while the iron's hot. You will have a failed close if you can't reach a critical mass of money. And there are many failed closings that happen a year with big law firms, small law firms, and then you owe lots of people money because you paid them to do stuff. What does outreach look like when you're raising a fund if you can't do general solicitation? Hopefully, I just walked through that with you. You post about general stuff, host events, get to know people, and then present them in the way that I did. What if we're doing a government link VC? Listen, government link VCs are really not going to, they're very hard because the governments generally foolishly provide a lot of requirements that are very hard to meet. So most government linked VCs, if you have money from like the EIF in Europe or whatever, they ultimately fail because they can't get good returns because the government puts too many constraints on the fund. In the formation process, is it a good idea to designate the first LP as initial LP and then let them influence the terms? No. There's something called an anchor LP. That's a concept from a long time ago. It's like, back in the day when there were anchor LPs, there are really no anchor LPs anymore. The first LPs, you can ask LPs on feedback. Look, the LPAs are all standardized. Don't use these cheesy lawyer LPAs. There's something called the cornerstone. Use the cornerstone. Let me see. Great suggest any resource documents that explain various fund structure options. I'm going to tell you, 99% of everyone in the world will start a Delaware fund. There'll be 3 entities. There's also something we've created called the Start Fund. If you're starting a fund, the last thing you do is think about structure. The only thing you need to do is thesis and commitments from LPs. Once you have those 2 things, then you think about structure. If you do not have your thesis and you do not have commitments from LPs, don't worry about structure. It's the last thing you think about, not the first thing you think about. Okay, there's someone pitching a company idea. In the case I have a great with time bound. Yeah, so someone saying I have a great deal, what do I do? You're gonna have to, if it needs to close within 6 months, you can't do anything about it. There, you can't do an SPV and roll it into the fund. There's one thing you could do, which is you can personally invest in a hot deal that's closing very quickly and warehouse it into the fund, but you cannot. That's your only option. You can personally invest in it and warehouse it into the fund. Last question. In our version of the 20 VC model, we're ramping up media efforts to both support our investment thesis and generate pipeline for LPs and potential portfolio. Guys, like, look, it's illegal to generally solicit, right? In Europe, if you generally solicit, you go to jail. In America, if you generally solicit, they will ban you from fundraising for years on end. Okay. And even at bake sales. So there's something called a 506C you can do, but you should never do a 506C. It's a terrible idea, which allows you to generally solicit, but then every investor that you take in has to go through a very intensive certification that they're accredited, and nobody wants to do it. So you're only going to get really kind of dumb LPs that will be willing to go through a tedious process to invest in your fund, and that's not wise. So do not generally solicit. Don't come up with, like, you may think it's a great idea to do all this media stuff, but you cannot talk about your fund, you cannot talk about your thesis until after you've closed the entire thing. So if you want to do some media spin to it, maybe you do, like, if you're doing AI, you can talk about AI, but you cannot talk about your fund. It's that simple. Is there a standard max percent LP that should be total fund? Yeah, generally speaking, this is called beneficial ownership issues. So you do not want an LP to be more than 20% of your total fund size. All right. With that said, we covered a lot of stuff. We ran over by 5 minutes. We started a little late. Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely day. This was really awesome. Thanks, guys.